folks, if you want to hop in just like Dave did, you're listening to the Call Sports New York, ad-free, interruption-free, break-free New York sports talk. We're doing a little national baseball talk right now, Wild Card Weekend. If you want to join the conversation just like Dave did, give us a call, give us a text at 917-793-1717. Check us out on Twitter at the Call Sports, at Kyle Fisher45. We can talk whatever direction you want to talk, New York sports or nationally, as we know there's a few big things going on. Quick check-in before I continue the conversation that Dave started us off on. The Tampa Bay, Cleveland, top of the 15th. Men on first and third with 2 outs for Tampa Bay. We're going to see where this pitch ends up. Strike 3 to end the inning, potentially. Drop third strike, and the inning, half inning is over. So we're going to head to the bottom of the 15th. Cleveland with a chance to recover. Jacob, I think you brought up a great point, right? I know that we're going to go back to Phillies for a moment here, but friend of mine who I really respect his opinion on baseball, great baseball mind. We had this conversation the other day. You know, I know that Buck talked about potentially if the Mets had won game 1, saving DeGrom for a game 3 or a game 1 in the NLDS and going Bassett in game 2. We know how that turned out, right? But with them pulling off the improbable victory in game 1, I, for a moment, thought, man, do we want to go Ranger in game 2 and save Nola for game 3? And then when you start to look at how the Mets have handled Nola recently, and I think the big thing that he pointed out is how Ranger has pitched against the Braves as well, going toe-to-toe with some of their studs in the lineup. I think that is going to be important, right? So I'm going to pull up Nola's stats because he mentioned it at the top against the Braves. But, you know, we know how good Nola was recently. You know, there's a saying in Philly, September Nola is here, and he really typically has struggled in September. But this season has been a little bit of a different feel from Aaron Nola. You know, in his last month, pitching to the tune of a 2.60 ERA, and obviously with the last 3 starts, a 1.93 ERA with that near perfect game through 7. Really been impressive. Let me find how he's done against the Braves this season, though, because that'll put kind of into perspective why they may not want to hold him back. One, I think the number one reason is, and I think that this is something that came up in my mind when Buck mentioned potentially going Bassett in game 2 if they had won game 1 is, and Jake, you can let me know how you feel about this too, but in a 3-game set, you have Monday off. Your goal, you have to get through this series, right? They win game 1. Why put a chance that you're going to force a game 3? Why not just throw your stud? You have to win the game to get there. Why risk a shot of something weird happening in game 3? You got that 1-0 advantage like the Phillies do. Throw your stud, throw Aaron Nola, get to the round, and then worry about the DS when you get there.
Well, I think that one of the problems that I've diagnosed for this Mets team, it was a lot worse last year, but I feel it coming back this year, bubbling back up to the surface, is that this team, as much of a little brother as they are to the Yankees, sometimes feels entitled to wins. They sometimes feel that, oh, we're going to win one game against the Braves, so I'm not worried about it too much, and that'll secure us the division because we'll have the tiebreaker. Or, oh, I'm not worried about the Cubs because they're the Cubs and we're the Mets and we were up by 10.5 on a point. Or, oh, I'm not worried about this. They have a tendency to play down to the competition, and I think this goes
Phillies and the Cubs as well. Sorry,
yes.
Go ahead.
I think that it's tough because they have a tendency to assume that they are good enough to beat these teams. So the fact of the matter is that they are good enough to beat these teams. They are good enough to beat this Padres team. They are good enough to beat that Cubs team. They're good enough to take one game away from the Braves. They have 101 wins to prove it this year. But because of that mentality that comes up sometimes of, well, we're going to take one game for the Padres so we can save DeGrom. And I do think that Buck deserves a little bit of credit for the foresight. You definitely want to have one of DeGrom or Scherzer available for that Dodgers series. That looms over your shoulder because as much as we can talk about October Dodgers and what they've been the past few years, it's still not something that you don't want to poke that bear too much with their lineup. but I think that ultimately it comes down to a situation where you assume that you're going to win game one. And I think that I was also in that let's get cute and start Bassett camp for game two if you win game one, just because you want to keep guys like DeGrom or Scherzer as rested as possible, considering that on one hand, Scherzer talks about how he wants to come out of the bullpen for some games. We'll see if they even gets a chance. And two, DeGrom coming off that blister, you don't want to push it with him when you just had him come off of over a calendar year, not a baseball year, a calendar year of an injury. You don't want to risk exacerbating anything, especially when we were talking earlier on the program about how DeGrom doesn't look like himself this year, or at least the self of old. I think that the Mets have already committed a cardinal sin in the past year with DeGrom by exacerbating his injury, potentially to a long-term extent. He had those interviews in the postseason where he was talking about how his injury got worse because they had him hold his arm a specific way going through the MRI tube, and that added an extra 2-3 weeks to his injury time. So it's something that you have to be abundantly careful with. You see what the blood blister did to Taijuan Walker earlier in the season and how he was off for about 3 starts. So you want to give DeGrom enough time to heal that up. Now, though, because you went in assuming that Scherzer would get it done, which it's a fair assumption. You don't assume Max Scherzer is going to lose everything in the matter of one game. Now that Scherzer has not given you that cushiony lead, now you have to go out and throw your ace out and hope that you get something of a DeGrom that you are familiar with from a couple of years ago.
Game over. Game over. Sorry, I know we're talking about that. Game over. Oscar Gonzalez, walk-off homer, the rookie, the 24-year-old, coming up huge. Walk-off homer in the bottom of the 15th. Cleveland heading to the NLDS. He's getting interviewed right now. We're not going to cut him, but if we find some quotes quickly on Twitter, we'll make sure to bring them to you. The 24-year-old getting the job done. For those who aren't familiar, obviously the Guardians are the youngest team in the league, bringing up a lot of young talent. They just hit very old school 80s, 90s style, early 90s style of play from that squad. They don't strike out a lot. They don't hit a ton of home runs, but Oscar Gonzalez getting it done with the long ball. First series clinching home run in franchise history happens for the 24-year-old tonight. Celebration on the field. And Yankees fans, you now know who you're going to face. So obviously that's going to be fun times. We know how the Guardians have performed this year. Okay, so to bring it back to the point, sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I cut in. I just saw that it happened right behind me. Cut in. So as the caller made a good point about Nola, right? It's not like his numbers have been terrible against the Braves, but in his career against the Braves, Aaron Nola with a 3.39 ERA. This season in particular, a little bit worse against the Braves. With that strong lineup, they got to him a little bit more. The Braves tuned him up to a 3.67 ERA in 5 starts. 1.078 whip, not terrible. Still striking out a decent amount of folks, not really walking a ton, which is good. But again, when you compare it to Ranger Suarez and what he's done against the Braves this year, you understand why they may keep things how they are. 3.21 ERA, spinning it up there. He's not a huge strikeout guy, but getting things done, striking out 7.5 per 9 against the Braves this season. So it makes a little bit of sense why you would go. And I agree. We talked about how you just want to shut things down. And I think that just like Cleveland now has the opportunity to, if you shut them down, then you get that extra day of rest. You move in, and again, you figure out that, especially for a team like the Phillies, who have had the unfortunate situation where they haven't made the playoffs in 11 seasons. If you have a chance to lock it up in advance, you do it, and you figure out the DS when you get there, especially with the uncertainty behind these 3 arms. You ride your top 2 guys. That's what got you here. And then you figure the rest out when you get to that next round and take on a familiar foe in Atlanta. So I know we talked about Yankees not wanting to face the Rays earlier in the season. We now know who they are going to play. We know that Cleveland is going to be advancing to the ALDS. I want to take a look at the Guardians roster that they brought with them. Obviously, some things could change for the move into the DS. You may make some adjustments, but looking at the Yankees. So I think that the big thing, obviously, the big debate is, do you have 3 or 4 guys in the rotation? Who's going to be behind Cole? Who's going to be behind Nasty Nestor for the Yankees? And I think that some folks' instinct may be to go in a different direction, but I was looking at the numbers last week, and I think that Luis Severino's got to be the guy. It's a lot of guys behind. Do you go Tyone? Probably not, right? I mean, he's consistent, he's fine, but I think Severino might be the guy, man. He's been impressive in a limited amount of time this year. What do you think that Yankees rotation is going to look like going into, especially now knowing you're going to have to face some additional very strong, some strong pitching on the other side from Cleveland?
Yeah, I think that ultimately it comes down to the fact that I don't know. I think the real question, besides the obvious one of what does the rotation look like, is how much do you trust Garrett Cole right now? Right, he's given up. What you've seen out of him, as my other host Stefan Florival so beautifully puts it, is this show every time where you get 4 strong shutout innings and then all of a sudden a 3-shot home run on cue. It's always the same, and especially when you're getting a young, promising, offense-heavy team like Cleveland, you really have to. I think that Severino is the go-to just because how much else is there to go to? This Yankees bullpen had a lot more length than this rotation. We knew that going in. Now the bullpen is suffering some injuries too. I think that the Yankees are in a bit of a tough spot, and instead of that, really the question is, what do you get to replace Garrett Cole's production when he's on? And ultimately, you're going into it expecting a shooting match. You kind of have to go into it expecting to go home run for home run because that's what your team does. And ultimately, the pitching is in a tough spot right now because of injury. So I think more than anything, you just go into it focusing on offense, kind of doubling down on the approach, and hope for the best. Hope that Judge can continue to. Stanton is heating up a little bit, but hope that Judge can continue to take the team on his back. The only issue is we've seen time and time again how home run hitting dries up a little bit during the postseason. You just hope that he can sustain the historic year into the postseason.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's. I agree to an extent, right? Because let me rephrase. I agree to an extent because I do agree that Garrett Cole. The question becomes, can he limit the long ball? And so far this season, although he has been dominant, although he led the league in strikeouts, he did have a propensity to give up the long ball, and that stayed true throughout. Now, the one thing that you can hang your hat on is that Cleveland is not a home run hitting team. They are a contact team. They don't strike out a ton, but Cole knows how to spin it. He knows how to strike guys out at a high rate. So it could be a perfect matchup for Cole, be facing Cleveland as opposed to Tampa Bay, who had a little bit more of a propensity for the long ball. Cleveland, just looking at their pitching, you're looking at matching up. I don't know what the order will be based on rest, but you're looking at matching the Yankees rotation up against Shane Bieber, who's had a wonderful bounce back, 200 innings, 2.88 ERA, 1.04 whip. Tristan McKenzie, who went today, who was lights out, 2.96. The Slim Reaper. I know that's probably not his nickname, but he sure looks it. He looks the part. 2.96 ERA, huge step up from the 24-year-old. Cal Quantrill finding it in Cleveland after the trade from San Diego. Zach Plesac taking a step. He'll likely be in the bullpen with Savali, or likely one of the two guys being consistent out there at least. And again, high strikeout rates for these guys. Bieber, even more impressive on top of the 2.88 ERA. His FIP, 2.87. Pretty even on top of everything. McKenzie's FIP is about a half a run higher. So maybe, being able to limit the long ball from the Yankees will be key there. Yanks, like I said earlier, behind Cole, behind Nasty Nestor, do you want to go Tyone, whose ERA and FIP are both around 3.9? I think the guy is Severino. He's limited action, 19 starts, but he's pitched to a 3.18 ERA. Domingo Armand can go out of the bullpen. He's shown the ability to do that in the past. Tyone could go bullpen as well. He'll likely be the fourth guy if needed, but if they are in a pressure situation, have to bring Cole back for another game. In the DS, obviously, you're likely going to stick to three. So you'd have Cole, Cortez, and likely Severino. They haven't announced that yet, but I think that Severino is probably the guy. Exciting. So just a quick check-in. We do have Mariners, Blue Jays going on right now. Blue Jays already put up 3 runs, middle of the fourth. So similar to yesterday's game where Seattle got out to that early lead, Toronto responding with 2 runs in the second and a run in the third to take an early lead there. So we'll see if Seattle can march their way back into that one. But yeah, the matchup is set for first matchup set. We have our first matchup, Yankees versus Cleveland in the DS. If you want to talk about how you're feeling about the Guardians, folks, join the conversation. Give us a call. You're listening to the Call Sports New York, ad-free, interruption-free, break-free. You're just going to hear our voices, constant sports talk, baby. That's the goal. That's the purpose. That's why we listen to sports talk radio, is to hear sports talked. If you want to call in, join the conversation, please do. Text or call 917-793-1717. Join us before we hop off at 6 o'clock. A lot more to talk about when it comes to MLB postseason. We'll give you a few check-ins. But before we wrap up, I want to kind of go back to some football talk, Jacob. For how excited I am about baseball, one thing you learn about me, it is my favorite sport by far. If the NFL were to suddenly collapse, I would be happy with baseball being around. I know that would bother a lot of people, but I would be ready to go with baseball 24/7 on the TV. One thing I want to talk about, and I teased it much earlier in the show. So if you were listening earlier in the show, we've teased it, and we kind of teased it a couple times by accident, and I teased extending the conversation. So I was listening in preparation for the show. I was listening to Can't Wait podcast on The Athletic, Jets podcast, and they actually talked about a what if, and it makes a lot of sense for this upcoming matchup for the Dolphins, and I'm really interested to hear your take on this, Jake. But we talked about it a little bit. Jets had an offer on the table for Tyreek Hill. They didn't offer any first, but the offers were considered to be pretty even from a Kansas City point of view. And it was essentially up to Hill if he wanted to go to Miami or New York. And at the end of the day, he chooses Miami. But what if Tyreek Hill had chosen New York? What might they look like right now? Surprising a few folks at 2-2. Wilson's health aside, what might this season look like? Would they be better right now and in a better position to continue to build this team if they had pulled off that trade? So just as a reminder, the Dolphins offer that was accepted was a 2022 first round, second round, and fourth round pick. The 29th overall, 50th overall. I forget what the number on the fourth was. I apologize for not having it. And then 2023, a fourth and a sixth. Jets offer 2022, 2 second rounders, number 35, number 38, and then number 69 for Hill. And they were going to get the 103rd pick back. Obviously, you'd have to sink some money into Hill, but it would have changed their draft strategy. So obviously, it would have been a little bit different. Number 35 was actually used to move up and get Curtis Johnson, who has 12 tackles and 1.5 sacks so far this year. You wouldn't have that production on the defensive end, obviously. A lot of the other picks were used to trade around. So not a huge difference, but your strategy would have been different going into that draft. So just take a look at, they took Garrett Wilson with their first pick, or with their early pick in the first round. You likely don't take Garrett Wilson if you just traded for Tyreek Hill, right?
Right.
So the question becomes, what do you do with that pick? They didn't have that pick in the trade, so you still would have had it. I know you had some depth with the offensive line, but would you have taken an offensive lineman in that spot? There was a lot of good offensive linemen taken. Charles Cross, Kenyon Green, Zion Johnson, Trevor Penning, all taken around that spot. Would you have made that same choice? Or would you have gone offensive line? Again, I know that one of the reasons that the offensive line is struggling is because they have a lot of injuries there and you can't predict those. But with that early pick, if you already have the skill position taken care of with the trade with Hill, do you go in a different direction to either bolster the defense or bolster that offensive line? Before I toss it over to you to get your feelings, I just want to get kind of the additional notes that I had on it. So Breece Hall would not have been picked. Jermaine Johnson would not have been picked. Taking a look, so one thing that they did on the pod, and I went back and confirmed, was if they still wanted to take a running back in the draft, who would have been available around that 103 pick? So if you didn't have Breece Hall, because he would have been taken with, or he was taken with one of the picks that was involved in the trade, Dameon Pierce from Houston was available there. And although I know that the game is a little bit different with all the injuries, Hall hasn't maybe looked as explosive as he could look with some health on the line. But Dameon Pierce has looked pretty good for a bad Houston team, so not that much of a difference for the two of them. You could have still ended up with two strong skill position pieces in Hill and Pierce, maybe with an additional offensive lineman. I don't know if it would have been drastically different. Obviously the young guys being able to build more depth with those young guys being on cheaper contracts and not having to sign Hill to that rich contract. $20 million a year on Hill versus three young guys that you got on rookie deals looks like a big step, but then you see what Hill's doing with maybe not the most explosive passer, but a guy who's shown that he could improve this year in Tua, leading the league in receiving yards. What position would they have been in if they made that trade for Hill? So I'll toss it over to you as the Jets fan. How going through those notes, and obviously express any other feelings you have about it, but do you think they would have been in a better position this year? And then we can talk about moving forward if Hill had taken the trade to New York.
I think this year is tough to gauge just because you have to factor in the fact that if we're going off of this year, we're going off of a year where our primary play caller was out for 4 weeks and we had Joe Flacco under center. So I think that it's really tough to say that we'd be in a better position just because of the fact that we were still without our starting quarterback, who has been a market improvement over our backup. So it's hard to say, yes, we could have had the better wide receiver, but would the quarterback have even been able to find him? That's really I think it becomes kind of a net neutral just because of that. That being said, I think that ultimately it's a move that is deceptive because, yes, Tyreek Hill is one of the most dynamic wide receivers in the league. There's no debating that. He moves the needle on a lot of teams, including the Miami Dolphins. But I think that, to your last point, that having Tyreek Hill for that much money as opposed to 3 rookies for much less money collectively, it is a net neutral or maybe even a net negative, just because the Jets are not in a position right now to be vying for those star contracts when they don't have the foundation for them to exist yet on this team. I think that the Jets have learned fairly quickly in this rebuilding process that free agents are not keen on spending their time at MetLife, at least as a Jet. Just based on front office dysfunction that we've seen time in and time out, I think that they've learned through that they have to build through the draft. And I think that having as dynamic a receiver for Zach Wilson as Tyreek Hill is fantastic. But I don't think that you can give up the flexibility of the future in cap space and in picks for a guy like Tyreek Hill. It kind of reminds me of, and forgive me for the basketball comparison again, it's just that's the only way I can think to describe it. It reminds me of the Carmelo trade for the Knicks, where yes, Carmelo Anthony is a future Hall of Famer potentially. There's no denying Carmelo Anthony's game in terms of his ability to be a good basketball player. But in getting Carmelo Anthony, the Knicks traded away a lot of what could have been their future, and thus I think lost a lot of momentum towards being a good team outside of that 2012-2013 season. So I think that getting Tyreek Hill, while yes, you're getting a guy who is dynamic, explosive, proven championship pedigree, I think you're also losing the ability to find guys like Garrett Wilson, who has been a bright spot on this team. You're losing even more time for Elijah Moore, who's kind of gotten the short end of the stick this season. You're losing the ability to draft a guy like Breece Hall, who, while not explosive, looks to be an important part of this offense. I just think that it's a one step forward, two steps back scenario. If you look at it, even if Zach Wilson is healthy through 4 weeks, I think that long term you're losing a lot of that flexibility to change directions as a franchise and rebuild towards something of, frankly, we're just looking for 500 football. So I think you're losing the ability to build towards that in a realistic way, even if you do have the personnel that says you should be there already.
Yeah, I feel you, man. It's it's a tough call because you see what Hill does. You know that he brings the name recognition. He brings the explosiveness that we saw in Kansas City that we've seen so far with Miami. But young talent is fun to build around too, man. It gives you hope for the future. Who knows? There's a lot of things that you can't necessarily predict, and I'm going to get into that on the other side. Guys, we got a half hour left with myself and Jacob on the line. If you're listening, join the conversation, guys. We love talking sports, but we love hearing from you guys just as much. We want to hear the pulse of the fan, pulse of the nation, what they want to talk about. You're listening to the Call Sports. Again, it's the new home. It's the new home for New York sports. If you're not listening yet, what are you doing? Ad-free, interruption-free, break-free. We're not going on tangents about Seinfeld, even though I love that show, right? We're not going on tangents about our favorite candies. Although if you do want to talk about that, feel free to follow me on Twitter because I have a snack podcast, but that's for another day. Right now, we're talking sports. We're talking New York sports. We're talking your teams. Let us know what you're feeling. Let us know what things you want to talk about. Like I said, half hour left. New York Sports Talk, the Call Sports. Join the conversation. Give us a call, a text, 917-793-1717. Check out at the Call Sports on Twitter. So one point you made, right, about the even if Zach Wilson was healthy, and I think that's a great thing, and it kind of made me think about some of the maybe the intangibles or not intangibles. What's the word I'm thinking of? That's not at all the word I meant. Erase that from the record. Strike it from the record. The unpredictable things that happen during an NFL season, right? It's a brutal game, and we've dealt with it. The Jets have dealt with injuries on the line. They dealt with injuries to Wilson. Flacco taking over the reins 11 years removed from his own Super Bowl run when he was relevant as a starting quarterback. Remember, the Philadelphia Eagles had to deal with that a couple years ago themselves. So looking at there's a lot of things that you can't predict, right? If you make this trade, you spend all that money on Tyreek Hill, and then these injuries still happen, and Flacco's the guy throwing to him, and they're losing these games, and maybe one of those comebacks, they don't come back, and instead of being 2-2, they're 1-3. And he knows, and he sees what Tua is doing down there with Waddle, and he sees the excitement down in Miami, and he sees the wonderful weather down in Miami. And he's up here in New York. It's getting cold. He's losing. Flacco's arm is going to fall off if he tries to throw it deep to him. And Hill, to his credit, isn't maybe on the level of a diva receiver a la like a Terrell Owens or Randy Moss was in his prime, but known to speak his mind. And would, if the injuries played out the same way, would Hill have been here and been in it and not been a problem in the locker room? Or would he have all of a sudden been upset, been disgruntled, and now you're dealing with a situation maybe in the offseason or midway through the season where the top prize, the guy that you went out and got to show your fan base, hey, we mean business. We are serious. Look at this man. We made him the highest paid receiver. We're paying this man to get it done on the field. We trust our young arm and Zach Wilson to get him the ball, and all of a sudden you're dealing with a situation where he is upset. And instead, you have a young guy in Garrett Wilson. You've saved that money. You can continue to spend smartly as the coach, as the GM, get together and continue to build this thing from the ground up. My opinion, as a team or as a fan of a team who has had to build in multiple sports, I think the key is build first and then get the guy right. So build from the inside out, build your lineup, get your young guys some reps, build your foundation, and then worry about getting that top tier guy. Don't spend on the top tier guy to sacrifice elsewhere and then face a situation where that top tier guy cannot perform to the best of his ability because he doesn't have the right supporting cast around him. Quick check into MLB. Teoscar Hernandez hit another home run, his second of the game. Blue Jays now up 4-0 at home against Seattle. Carlos Santana, the former Philly, part of the wonderful meme that pops up every once in a while where we had 5 first basemen in the lineup playing different positions at one point. Carlos Santana up to the plate right now with a man on for Seattle. But Gausman dealing right now, throwing 95 on the paint against Santana, and has only allowed 1 hit so far through 4 1/3. So looking like Toronto will bounce back in a big way if they can hold on. Obviously, that'll go to a game 3 tomorrow, and the winner will face those Houston Astros that the Philadelphia Phillies just left behind in the regular season. But yeah, so hopping back over to the Jets, we mentioned it quickly, and big shout out because again, I did get the idea. I don't want to take credit for it. I got the idea to revisit this from the Athletics, Zach Rosenblatt, Tim McMaster, and Marissa Dunn, the wonderful hosts of the Can't Wait podcast. They were discussing the revisiting of of that potential trade and what position would they be in. Now, granted, like we said, right? Let's play full optimism mode, which is very unlike us, Jake. Very unlike you and your fandom. Very unlike me as a Philly fan. I embrace the misery. I know it's going to be awful every year. That's why I freaked out and scared my daughter when we scored 6 runs last night. So I'm used to the misery, right? But let's play the ultimate optimist for a moment. Say they make that trade. Tyreek Hill comes in. Wilson doesn't get hurt. The O-line, not as many injuries, can hold up okay. Well, I'm not going to say they're the best O-line in the league, but a little bit more health takes a little bit of pressure off of Zach Wilson. He has some time to throw the ball. With Hill doing what he's doing so far this season, with a healthy Zach Wilson, maybe they get Dameon Pierce in the 3rd round as opposed to Hall in the 2nd round. So still a guy who's shown a lot of potential so far this year, and with a healthy line may show even more. Doesn't that, dude, that's got to titillate you a little bit. Thinking about the potential of what would our team look like? Some bad miscues in those 2 games. Maybe we don't have to come back in the other 2 to be at 2-2 right now. Do you think they could look 3-1 or 4-0 and be in charge of that division? Or do you think maybe even with everything being perfect, they're still sitting here at 2-2? Might look a little different, but still sitting here at 2-2 at the end of the day.
I mean, it's tough. I think they could easily look 3-1 just because, to your point, there's been those few miscues and those losses that could easily be overturned in an alternate universe. But I still have to stand by the philosophy that I agree with you on, that building is more important than adding. You gotta finish building the house before you can add the 2nd floor, right?
Gotta build that foundation, man.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that while yes, the idea of having a Tyreek Hill and then also Zach Wilson is healthy and looks better than last year, and now you have this 1-2 punch. I think that obviously is tantalizing. Something to keep in mind too that I should have brought up as part of my first point, but I'm reminding myself to say it now. Right now, in the year of our Lord 2022, I don't think that Zach Wilson is as good or better of a quarterback as Tua Tagovailoa. I think that that's something to keep in mind too. Tyreek Hill is not only a fantastic player, but is benefiting from having a very good quarterback. Whereas Zach Wilson, while he shows flashes, especially in those 2-minute warning drills, of being a great quarterback, he's not there yet. He's too green, and I think that that's something to keep in mind too. That even if you got Tyreek Hill this year, he might not have the numbers that he has now because he's not dealing with someone who can undeniably support him as that passer. Obviously, ironic to be talking about this now with Tua missing some time due to concussion-related stuff. But when Tua is on in that healthy optimism, sunshine and rainbows world, Tua is still a better quarterback than Zach Wilson. So while yes, obviously the Jets need a guy like Tyreek Hill eventually to put them on top of the mountain, God willing, they still need more pieces to get there, and they still need the pieces they have to continue to develop. So I think that it's just a too soon move, and you gotta walk before you can run. The Dolphins are a little further along, so they get to have the Tyreek Hill. That being said, the Jets will get there eventually. I am optimistic about the future of this team. It's just the matter of the fact that they are not, like, Zach Wilson's not there yet. Zach Wilson couldn't provide for Tyreek Hill the way that Tua can.
It's funny that you say that too, because although I agree, like, we've seen the results on the field, right? Tua has drastically improved and shown what he can do when you put the skill position players around him. But the book on Tua was that he couldn't make those throws, and that why get two speedsters on the team in Hill and Waddle when your man can't make those throws. And then obviously in preseason, he shows that he can do it. In training camp, he shows that he can do it. Not that always means something, but it has translated onto the field so far. It's funny, right? Like maybe that's the book that ends up being the book on Wilson too, right? You don't know how good they are with an extreme weapon until they have an extreme weapon. And that's exactly what Tua showed us. Not saying that Zach will be exactly what Tua is. But yeah, it's funny to look at it that way. Taking a quick pause real quick. Carlos Santana for the Mariners. I made jokes about him being in that horrible Phillies lineup a few years ago, inches away from putting two up on the board for Seattle. Double off the top of the fence. Seattle ends up knocking one in. J.P. Crawford, also another former Phil. They were both part of the same trade to Seattle to bring Gene Segura to Philadelphia. Gene Segura up to the plate right now with one out, one run cross. So it's 4-1. Gausman's still in the game. Man on second, one out in the inning. Sorry. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting topic to revisit a trade like that. I love doing that in baseball, but the trades are so less frequent and so less involved in the NFL that it's fun to revisit something like that. So, Jake, we don't have a ton of time left in the game. Where do we want to go to close it out? What are you thinking? I have some ideas myself, but I want to make sure you get something in here if you got something that you want to go.
Well, I do think that we should touch on some of the news of the day from another sport. We did talk about basketball earlier, but something that I find interesting as someone following this whole Warriors fiasco is that Draymond Green announced today in a press conference that he will be taking time away from the team at least a few days to regroup mentally. But I was just on last night, not even 12 hours ago, talking about the fact that I think that Draymond Green is not long for this Golden State team, personally. I think that they have to, at a point, recognize that while this team got them 4 rings and 5 finals appearances, they are going to have to move on to the future, which looks bright with guys like Jordan Poole, ironically, James Wiseman, Jonathan Kuminga. These guys look like they can lead the charge into the next generation, and Draymond Green is not going to be a part of this team much longer. I thought that he was just originally not going to re-sign in the offseason because he was talking about how he wants that max deal. But now I don't know how you keep this group together if you don't exact some discipline for what happened the other day. I look at the egg on your face right now for trying to downplay it, saying that it was just a spat between teammates. Now that we have the video, we know that's not true. And I think the only way that the Warriors organization gets out of this unscathed is by shedding themselves with Draymond Green, and either through disciplinary action or through trade. But I find that really interesting that Draymond Green, of all people, the real poster child of he's got that dog in him and he's gonna first one in, last one out. announcing that he's going to take time away from the only team he's ever played for after buddying up with LeBron James all offseason. I think that his days are numbered and he knows it.
That's an interesting take. I don't know if I necessarily agree, and that's the beauty of this, right? We don't have to agree. But I don't know if I necessarily agree that his days are numbered in Golden State, although I do think that this is a red flag. And I think that people have talked about him being a little bit more outspoken and it potentially being a detriment to their success, although we know how they rebounded last year. So I'm looking at some of the statements that he made from Mark Stein tweeting them out. He said, "I was wrong for my actions, and for that I have apologized to my team. I've apologized to Jordan." Green said he has caused huge embarrassment, not only for myself, but the organization, Poole and Poole's family. Another quote here: "This is the task at hand, to rebuild trust in the locker room." And I agree. There's one thing when you're young, when you see a lot of spats happen on the sidelines in college because dudes are hot-headed, but you're a multi-time champion now. You're a guy who's been around the block. You've been with this team forever. You're supposed to be one of the leaders on the team. And then people go, we can even go back to some of the drama that was caused between him and KD. We don't really know who's at fault there. He's going to tell you that that there was not a lot of drama. And it was blown up out of proportion. And both guys got on a podcast and said that. One thing I would love to see, and I know he made this public statement, but Draymond has been spitting Mr. New Media, right? That if you want to know the real stories, come to the source. And he's part of this movement where a lot of guys are getting podcasts and doing documentaries that they have a say in, and they get to say the story that they want to, and radio silence from his end, except for this public statement, right? We'll hop on the podcast. Tell us what really went down. Tell us how you really feel. I think that, one thing, and I'm going to get side tangent for a second here, but we'll come back to it, is that this whole New Media look, and oh man, the Jeter documentary and the Brady documentary and all these guys getting these documentaries. Everybody has an angle. Everybody has a way to spin it, right? Even the media who tries to stay neutral as possible, and I try to stay neutral as possible when talking about these topics, I still have something that's going to give me a bias one way or the other. And Draymond, when he does give us this statement, especially the further removed we get, whenever he does talk about it on the podcast, we're going to hear his version of events, his spin of events. When he and Poole eventually make up, and if Draymond does stay in Golden State and they figure it out, they're going to get on a podcast together and they're going to talk about how it was all overblown and it's just locker room stuff and it should have stayed private and it was between us. And, I know he said that he's embarrassed, but I could see the narrative changing in 6 months. And that's one of the issues when you have the subjects of the conversation being the ones to tell the story instead of a neutral observer. Now, we all know, and, I'm not going to sit here and deny that a lot of the neutral parties will say things and spin things a certain way to get a reaction, to get extra eyes on the product. So I do understand that there is a benefit to the New Media, but also in addition, you need to be careful with where you're getting your information from because everybody has their biases. Before we continue the conversation, we're shifting back to NBA and some NBA drama, the topic of the hour. You're listening to the Call Sports Radio, your home for ad-free, interruption-free, no breaks, no stops, New York Sports Radio. My name is Kyle Fisher. On the ones and twos is Jacob Gardner. If you want to join the conversation, we got about just under 15 minutes left before we toss over to my man Joe Castro, taking us from 6 o'clock on. You can give us a call, give us a text, 917-793-1717. Join the conversation. Let us know what you think about the topic of the day or any other topics for that matter. So, Jake, I want to kind of throw back to you for a minute and get your thoughts while we're on drama. So, one, we can continue the Draymond conversation for sure, right? I don't know if this spells the end of his reign in Golden State. He's meant a lot to that team. I think right now it's just going to be damage control. So we might not be on the same page there, but it'll be a very interesting thing to watch. You can't just go around punching your teammates. I mean, if I were to get punched in my office on Monday, I'm just not showing up to work. I'm going to call my boss and be like, guess what? I'm done unless that dude's gone. But we know that sports don't work the same way. I mean, how many guys have histories of issues, whether it be off the field with teammates, You know, I lived it when T.O. made the entire thing, the entire world about him, even though I'm the biggest Terrell Owens fan there is. When he made everything about him, bringing all the media cameras to his driveway while he did sit-ups and showed off his 27 abs. He keeps one flabby just to be humble. But it comes down to whether or not he can repair the relationship. And if he can repair it with Poole, I don't see a reason why he can't compare it with everybody else. One thing I'll say, and I saw this was an interesting take from, I believe it was Damian Lillard was asked about it. On the altercation itself, this is direct quote from at least Sean Hinkin did tweet this out, so coming directly from him on Twitter. Lillard said, on the altercation itself, as wrong as it was, I think if you're a boxing fan, in boxing, they say you've got to protect yourself at all times. I think Draymond, who is known pretty well, who I know pretty well, probably walked away from that situation saying, I probably shouldn't have done that to my teammate. But Poole's probably walking away thinking, when I push somebody, I should know that something may be coming back. And that's it. That's an unfortunate situation. He does say a little bit more, but I'm interested to hear your take on that particular part of it, right? Right. He shoved Draymond first. The reaction from Draymond was obviously significantly over the top and should have been subdued. But dude, if I shove somebody, I can't just turn my back and walk away. I mean, we saw what happened with Jokic and what's his name? Oh my God,
Markieff Morris.
Yes, Morris. He was out for most of the season because he turned his back after hitting Jokic hard. Yeah. Granted, that's in a game. Practice is a little different, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the on kind of, you get what's coming to you. You shove somebody in a high intensity environment like that, you got to be ready for a receipt.
Right. I think that it's tough because it's one thing when I will say outright, I don't think that we can call this a sucker punch. I saw some people on Twitter calling it that. It's clearly not, now that we've seen the video. If Poole was aware of the fact that Draymond was in his face, but I do think that we've seen it before. There's a difference between shoving a guy off of you and shoving a guy as an offensive move. I think is really the distinction I'm going to make. Draymond was pushing Poole up against a wall by walking into him. I understand. I'm willing to give Jordan Poole the benefit of the doubt when a man walks up to you, it gets in your face and starts cursing at you, to just be like, no, man, get off me. Obviously, he shouldn't have turned his back on him. But on the other side of the coin, the devil's advocate is, are you really expecting to get punched in the face by your teammate? It's another thing with like the Morris versus Jokic thing when it's two guys on different teams. You don't know what to expect because you don't know the guy as well. But you said earlier that Draymond Green is supposed to be a leader on this team. He's been around the block. He's won 4 rings with them, and Jordan Poole is only 23 years old. If anything, taking positions out of it, Draymond Green should be a mentor figure in that locker room. And if that's the case, then I don't see why Jordan Poole would expect it. And yes, in boxing, you're on defense all the time, but I don't think Jordan Poole was trying to start an altercation by shoving him away. I think he was avoiding one, and it's tough. It's tough to play the blame game about it, because I think that a lot of people were talking about before we saw the video that Jordan Poole was instigating it and he had been acting weird throughout the postseason, which everyone and their mother has come out and denied since then, especially now that the video is out. And it's also a thing where chirping is normal in an NBA practice. We hear all the stories about how Jimmy Butler gets up in the face of his teammates and talks all that crap. And we hear stories about how guys get up in each other's faces all the time. And I refuse to believe that Draymond Green is going to be that sensitive about it most of the time. It's for a guy who tries to be the modern day Dennis Rodman, getting up in other people's faces, gouging eyes during playoff games and hitting people where the sun don't shine during playoff games too. I kind of find it hard to believe that Draymond Green would have this kind of reaction. But the fact of the matter is that he did. So I can't sit here and be like, oh, I don't believe it. I just think it's more than anything, it's a little appalling, the behavior, and I'm glad that Golden State is evaluating a punishment. I think that's something that they've been unwilling to do in the past about like their top three guys. But ultimately, I don't know how you, from the front office perspective, I don't know how you keep Draymond after a situation like that, especially when he's an expiring deal. I think that definitely incentivizes them to ship him away. But also from a Jordan Poole perspective, in a league where you kind of get to go where you want and the player has the power over the front office, if you're a young player who's proven that you have an important role on a finals bound team, on a title contending team, and you get punched in the face by your teammate, in a situation where I think most people are in agreement that it was unwarranted, especially when he could have broken the kid's jaw with how hard he punched him. Because like it's again, if we're gonna play a game of degrees, he did not need to punch him that hard, even if he was gonna punch him. He laid him out. I think that if you see that he get punched in the face by a teammate, that has a history of violence on the court, and then the front office tries to downplay it and then gives them nothing more than a slap on the wrist, are you really gonna sit there and take that when you know that you can walk and be an important part of another team? I think it's such a tricky situation on every side because everyone except the Warriors front office has the power to leave, and I don't think that the Warriors front office would be smart to keep everyone in house. So it's hard to gauge what's going to happen, but I think that the last thing that we expected to happen is a team like the Golden State Warriors, who has been in lockstep with itself for the better part of a decade now, starting to show a little bit of dysfunction and showing some cracks in the armor of a team that, frankly, has kind of usurped LeBron in terms of having a legacy in the 2010s because they have 4 rings to show for it and he doesn't. Either way, it's going to be a really interesting story to follow this offseason and the season throughout up until the deadline. What's going to happen with Draymond, Poole, in this Golden State Warriors situation?
I think you actually made a really good point there at the end. Right before your last note about how the NBA players really do have a lot more control, right? So talking about how Poole, if he's not satisfied with the apology and he's not satisfied with this veteran who's on the last year of his deal, the way that this guy's supposed to be the emotional and the emotional leader and the leader in the clubhouse. If he had pulled, maybe they get in a little bit of a scuffle, maybe he doesn't hit him as hard, and then he talks to him about how to handle those situations in the future. Like, hey, man, they're going to do this to you on the court. You got to be able to keep a level head. Maybe that's something that they build on. But instead, Draymond, like you said, clocked him. It wasn't a quick shove to the face. It wasn't a quick bump. He clocked the man. And yeah, I mean, Jordan Poole, if he's upset, he could start to, flex his muscle a little bit and potentially request to go somewhere else. I mentioned it briefly, but it's not the first time that we've seen drama, just maybe because other guys have bigger names and they were able to suppress it and they were still in that window where KD and Draymond had some drama back in the day. Not like this, but one of the reasons that KD wanted to leave was because of the drama with Draymond, and he wanted to be kind of the guy somewhere. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Draymond. I don't think the Warriors are going to default to trading him. I think that they're going to try and diffuse the situation internally, but it's really going to be up to, I think you made a good point. It's going to be up to Poole to see how comfortable he is playing around him moving forward, and really if he's going to be comfortable staying there with Draymond, maybe at least through this season, knowing that he may be gone regardless, while Poole sticks around for a few more years. One thing I did want to correct, you mentioned that the Warriors had 4 championships since 2010, and LeBron doesn't. He does. He has 4 championships. They were just with 3 different teams, and then the bubble championship. You can weigh that how you want, but I will take no LeBron slander here on this show. I am unfortunately ripped by all of my friends for being one of the biggest LeBron fans ever. Quick update. Toronto up 7-1 now. Rogers Center blowing up, exploding. The fans are going nuts. I did not see how all the runs scored, but inning continuing, 7-1 advantage over Seattle in the bottom of the 5th. Currently 2 outs. Seattle went to the bullpen, brought in Paul Sewald, their electric closer, and the Blue Jays are getting to him as well. So watching closely if you're a MLB postseason fan. Toronto coming back in a big way, will likely stay up in this game and force a game 3 for tomorrow. I know we're getting near the end of it. If you guys stick around, you're going to hear my man Joe Castro taking over for me in a couple minutes. He's going to run another Philly guy. So, feel free to send us some Philly hate on Twitter. We love it. We enjoy the conversations. Make sure you join in with my man Joe as well. Call Sports. You can give Joe a call. Give him a text, 917-793-1717. Talking a little bit about the Phillies before we wrap up. Obviously, crazy game. They have a game tonight. We'll see how it plays out. Nola on the mound after that amazing comeback last night, after that amazing Nola start to finish and clinch the postseason for the Fightin' Phils. Have a chance to put it away against the Cardinals tonight. We'll see how everything plays out. Just a little preview of the game. Obviously, we know what Michaelis has done this season for the Cardinals. We made fun of Darren Ruff being in the Mets lineup earlier. No surprises here with the righty Michaelis on the mound. Marsh back in the starting lineup. Castellanos sitting 5th. Bryce down to 4 behind JT again. I think that might be the right decision with Bryce's recent struggles. He can still pop off, but maybe not the on-base machine that he once was. So Schwartz, Hoskins, Real Muto, Harper, Castellanos, Bohm, Marsh, Segura, and Stott, the hero from yesterday, Segura down in the 8-hole. It's going to be interesting to see how they play out. I'm excited. I'll be watching the Mets game closely. Jacob, I'll be really excited for you. I may be secretly cheering if they go down again, but DeGrom on the mound should be a savior for them. But, got to rep my Phillies tonight. So good luck to the Mets. Good luck to all the Mets fans. Phillies are in full effect. I appreciate everybody listening in. We're right at the top of the hour. So my man Joe Castro is ready to take over. You're listening to the Call Sports New York. Take us away, Joe. Thanks, man.
The Call, Sports Talk New York.